Here today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for coming out to another in our Palm Springs Air Museum's continuing series of Saturday commemorative programs. My name is Greg Kenny. I'm the education coordinator here at the museum, and it's my honor to introduce today's featured program. Of course, before we start anything else, we're going to go ahead and have our colors presented to us from Palm Springs High School as well as Yucaipa High today, and this is a JAF ROTC. So if you folks would please mute your cell phones, rise and remove your caps, and remain standing. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order! Colors! Right! Face! Forward! March!
Thank you. Palm Springs and Yucaipa High School, JAF ROTC. You may be seated. Well, at this point, I would be remiss if I didn't thank a few more people, including museum members here today, volunteers, of course, and any board members who may be here today. These are the people that make this museum and these programs all possible. So thank you very much, those of you that are here today. Let me give you a quick rundown on what we have in store for you today. I think it's an outstanding program. We are going to hear from Tuskegee Airman Mr. Mitchell Higginbotham. He's going to share a brief history of African American experience in World War II. We have a four-member panel that does include Mr. Mitchell Higginbotham as well. And the panel will be moderated by renowned journalist Gloria Greer, who's been kind enough to be here today. Thank you, Gloria. And after that, if that weren't enough, we also have, if you didn't hear it come in, a P-51 Mustang, which will fly after the program is finished in here. And that's not it. Once you see the plane fly, join us back in here. And these gentlemen have been kind enough to stick around afterwards. If you'd like them to sign an autograph, if you'd like to shake their hands, they'll be available after that as well. So please, after you see the flight, come back out in and meet them in person as well. And we've also got a little extra excitement. There's a man known as the Bronze Buckaroo here today, Mr. Herb Jeffries. This man is the American jazz singer, actor, and National Cowboy Hall of Fame inductee. So he'll be here as well. So make sure you catch him and shake his hand as well. Now before I do anything else, I just want to tell you two very brief stories, and I do promise they'll be brief. I know you didn't come here to see me today. The first one takes place on December 7th, 1941, and we all know what happened on that day. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack. Well, this is a story of a 22-year-old cook on the USS West Virginia. On that date, during the attack, this cook left his position, went to the bridge. His captain was injured. He rescued his captain from the bridge, took him to safety. After that, he went on to man a gun battery that was unmanned at the time. Now, despite the fact that this cook was untrained in the weapon that he was using, he still managed to shoot down 2 Japanese aircraft that day. A hero. For this, he was awarded the Navy Cross. That's the first story. The second story comes in the form of a quote, and I think The exact words are best delivered here. And this was from a member of the 761st Tank Battalion in World War II. And this is the quote. "To be a black soldier in the South in those days was one of the worst things that could happen to you. If you go to town, you would get off the sidewalk if a white person came by. If you went into the wrong neighborhood wearing your uniform, you got beat up. If you stumbled over a brick, you were drunk and you got beat up. If you were off post and you were hungry and you couldn't find a black restaurant or a black home that you knew, you know what? You would starve. You were a soldier, out there wearing the uniform of your country, and you were getting treated like a dog. And that happened all over the South." Those are the two stories. Now, despite the difference in their tone, they do have many things in common. One of which is they're both absolutely true. The second is that they're both experiences of African Americans during World War II. The first was of Dory Miller, who later gave his life while serving during the war. He gave his life in the South Pacific. The second was from Sergeant Johnny Stevens, who later went on to be awarded the Bronze Star for serving in Europe. And the third thing that these two stories have in common is that they are not unique. Heroism and prejudice highlighted and plagued African Americans while serving in World War II. Men and women who persevered through the hardships of war were forced to overcome even more hardships hurled at them by racists and bigots in the country that they had sworn to defend. And all because of the color of their skin. But overcome and triumph they did. And today, we as Americans are all so much the better for it. So, without any further ado, I give you the Palm Springs Air Museum's African Americans in World War II program. And its featured speakers, Mr. Mitchell Higginbotham, Dr. Robert Higginbotham, Mr. George Edwards, and Mr. Rusty Burns. Gentlemen, on behalf of myself and the Palm Springs Air Museum, thank you for your service. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mitchell Higginbotham.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be back here again at the Palm Springs Air Museum. I've been here many times, and with the initiation of many of what you see about you. And I'm listed here to give you some overview. Greg Kinney just seemed to do a pretty good job of it there. He seems to be very well acquainted with what we've done and what we've gone through. But just glancing over the audience here, many of you seem to be seniors, and you might have some idea of what we're getting at and what existed in the United States at the time that we were growing up and becoming a part of the military. And many of you veterans here, and you may have some idea of what we were all about. Black Americans have been great participants in the history, especially military history of this great country, starting with Crispus Attucks back in the Revolutionary War at Bunker Hill in Massachusetts, on up through and including our brave ones now in Afghanistan and Iraq. And my favorite hero back in World War I, of course, was Bullard, Jacques Bullard. He wanted to, he was from Georgia, a black man who wanted to fly. And of course, they wouldn't accept him here to fly. He had to go to France and fly with the old volunteer French Air Force over there, and he was awarded all the outstanding medals for his great performance there. And on through all the great wars that we participated in were. So I try to relate to you and make you acquainted with some of the hardships we endured, but I got about 5 to 10 minutes and I can't scratch the surface. So I'll just limit some of my remarks to my personal involvement. I'm now, I'll be 89 years of age in a week, and I went into the military in 1942, a month after Pearl Harbor, and when I found out that if I always wanted to fly, and I was a part of the Junior Birdmen of America. That was a national organization that built model airplanes. So there was someone in my little hometown back in Swickley, Pennsylvania, that was a World War I veteran, and he advised me that if I wanted any kind of a chance to do that, I would have to volunteer. So rather than being drafted, I volunteered and passed the examination to fly, and they just opened flying military with a token arrangement for one fighter squadron, the 99th, down in Tuskegee, Alabama. So waiting around forever trying to be called, I finally was called to go into the civilian pilot training program there at Tuskegee. We had developed some flight instructors, black flight instructors in the primary phase of training there at Tuskegee, Alabama, that had been started their training in some segregated colleges around the country. And they ended up there in Tuskegee, and they trained all of our flyers in their first phase of training there at Moton Field in Tuskegee, which is now a national monument, has been taken over by the Department of Interior, and they're making it, been dedicated just a year ago as a national monument. So myself, that when I went finally in the Aviation Cadet Corps and then graduated as a second lieutenant with bars and wings on the shoulders and so forth. And we were given time for visitation at home following graduation. And then in order to do that, we had to get from Tuskegee by train, all-day affair, over to Atlanta, Georgia, which was not that many miles away. But it took us forever to get to Washington, D.C., and 4 of us was going home through National Airport in Washington, D.C., and we were hungry and tired when we got there, and seated in the dining room, and waitresses was flying by us, and we refused service right in the National Airport in Washington, D.C. So that gives you some idea of the turmoil that we had to endure. And we had to fight for the right to fight. And the culmination, I guess, my experience was finally occurred at Freeman Field, Indiana. I have some pictures there from the newspapers where the commanding officer was a racist Southerner, and he was determined through assistance from the General Hunter of the 1st Air Force to segregate all the facilities, recreational facilities on the military post. There was about 500 black officers and less than 100 white officers. He was determined to reserve that officers club for whites only, and so in order to do that, they had to violate the Army regulations through a gimmick, and we were ordered, direct orders, to sign that we read and understood the orders that we would not use certain facilities on the post. And 104 was refused even after given direct orders to comply, and reminded that the disobedience of direct order in time of warfare was punishable up to including death. And so we still refused to sign. We were sent back to Kentucky where we originated, and met with armed guards, with bars on the windows, and we were taken back to the barracks that we had left, and they put up floodlights all over the area so that we would be confined to that specific location. German prisoners of war was all around the post working, and they had a lot more freedom than we did. So we were held for, myself, 2 weeks until they investigated the situation, and political pressures from the blacks in America, including black newspapers, put so much pressure on them that they decided that they would release 101 of us, and we were allowed to go home on furlough. And then 3 of the fellows were actually court-martialed. That's a military trial, put on trial, and 1 was convicted, my roommate, who's now deceased as of last year, Bill Terry. Bill Terry was a fellow that had graduated from UCLA before I met him in Tuskegee. And he and a young man named Jackie Robinson integrated basketball at the in the Pac-8, it is now the Pac-10 conference. And Bill Terry was convicted and fined $150. For 50 years this went along, and finally we had a black undersecretary of the Air Force, Mr. Rodney Coleman, who was able to effect a change of records. And we were reprimanded, and me, myself, in my military records. That was erased. Roger Terry was reimbursed this $150 with absolutely no interest after the 50 years. So that's just an inkling of some of the embarrassments and the indignities and the degradation of almost every day we had to confront during those days. And I hope you can appreciate it, and I can appreciate the differences, although we are a long ways from being perfect here in race relations, but we've made great progress, and with the crowning feature of our new president, Barack Obama. So things are looking up, and thank you, and I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues.
Thank you very much, sir. Where?
Before I introduce you to the other veterans who are here, I want to say how really proud I am to be here today, because these veterans gave so much for the freedoms that we enjoy today. And the fact that they didn't have the freedoms that some of us enjoyed always is just so incomprehensible to me, and that they continued to fight and do everything they could to preserve the freedoms of this country. So I am now going to introduce you to George Edwards. He is with the 92nd, I'll look at it. But anyways, the Buffalo Brigade and the Buffalo The Buffalo Soldiers. And this goes back before World War II, goes back to World War I, and I believe the Civil War as well. Although George Edwards was not in the Civil War. George, can you come up here? Do you mind? Because if we bring you the mic, I don't think they can see you. And we had lunch here, by the way, before, a little brunch, and I just heard the most fascinating stories of the past. I'm just, yeah, okay, 90 years young.
I can tell this youngster here a few things.
Okay.
I'm with me. I was born in Evansville, Indiana, next door to the Ku Klux Klan headquarters. I have a few friends here from Evansville right now. Although I left there 69 years ago. Yesterday I was drafted in the Army. And so I was in there a little ahead of Dr. Scheer. I was there with the Buffalo Soldiers in 1941, February the 18th, 1941. I saw Pearl Harbor, believe it or not, in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. But I was a staff sergeant in the Army in 3 months. I was a first sergeant in 9 months. In 11 months, I was a master sergeant. And 14 months, I was a regimental sergeant major of the 369th Infantry, a World War I outfit fighting Hollywood. So, but being born in Evansville, next to the Ku Klux Klan headquarters, I knew how to fight dirty. I knew how to fight dirty as a first sergeant. But I learned also 3 things: see nothing, say nothing, hear nothing, from the time I was 2 or 3 years old. And I have on my cap just about all of the life membership in all of the veterans organizations except the American Legion. I have a membership in the American Legion, but the American Legion was started in November 1919. I was born in October. So we knew as kids who were coming into the KKK meeting, so we sat on the sidewalk watching they came in, and we could peek through the windows in our bathroom, so we saw a lot of the things that went on there. And when the American Legion met, we knew who they were, because we'd seen them go in their other meeting. So I'm a member of the American Legion, but I'm a life member of the Military Purple Heart, the American Veterans, the ABC, and a few other little things. But I did go in early in 41, and after Pearl Harbor, I made the first sergeant right after Pearl Harbor, and we came into Needles, set up our headquarters here. There was nothing here but mosquitoes, a few teepees, and a lot of rattlesnakes, and lots of wild animals up in here. And we set up 17 machine gun nests from where the tram is to Indio. And we walked it with a full field pack, a shiny helmet, but we wore overcoats during the summertime because we trained. And Patton relieved us in February of 1942. So we were here before Patton. But I had made first sergeant, and I'm one of the few people that spent honeymoon in Needles, California. And the only person I know that spent honeymoon in a worse place was Clark Gable. He spent his honeymoon at a little town just below Needles, about 10 miles below Needles, where all the donkeys hang out. And that's, but I will, if you were all men here, I would tell you why that was one of the best places to spend your honeymoon. But I won't talk otherwise. I've been a widower for 59 years. 59 years a widower. So I couldn't say what I'd tell you, but if you ask me the question in the corner, I'll tell you why that was a hell of a place to spend the honeymoon. That was a test. If you passed that test, everybody knew you were a good man. But we had a lot of problems with the service. And I was with the Tuskegee, was there when they started the organization for the Tuskegee Airmen. But I had 2 years of college. And to be a Tuskegee Airman, you had to have 4 years of college or better just to be a janitor. That's why I sorely respect them, because when I left the service, I made sure that I got a college education, and I've got a daughter over here now but I have 4 daughters, and my wife died in childbirth, and I had some children, small children. But I made sure, from what I learned from the Tuskegee Airmen, to get that education. Because it was sort of a slammer to learn how to fly a little Piper Cub, but I couldn't go beyond that. So I have a great respect for the Tuskegee Airmen because they had that educational advantage. But now I'm to talk pretty close because my oldest daughter is senior vice president of 99-cent train that has all these big stores around town. But when we finished, well, I can recall the Tuskegee Airmen in one incident when a General Allman, whom I'll be talking to a little bit more about, was a Korean veteran because I'm more alert to what happened, which got rid of a lot of my bitterness with the Korean War. But General Allman was appointed because he happened to be the brother-in-law of George C. Marshall, who was the Secretary of the Army. And see, when World War II came on, MacArthur was sent to he had all his senior ROTC, or senior West Pointers. Eisenhower drew the younger West Pointers, and Mark Clark, who was severely criticized, drew the Southerners, VMI and so forth, and George C. Marshall was a member of the VMI. But and that was a result really of, and there's no World War I veterans here. Is there anybody any over 90 years old here? Is there anyone over 90? Yeah, Herb Jeff is here? Yeah, 90. Well, I salute him then. But when I made first sergeant, I was considered the meanest person in the world because when the war at Pearl Harbor hit, right before we came here, I was given the job of rounding up all the baby buggies. I don't care what your rank was, I had to take your baby buggy because we did not have any machine guns or tanks or other. So we took those baby buggies away from these mothers and used them. We put a stove tag on or a pipe on it, or we rigged it up, and that was our machine guns or our anti-tank guns and so forth. But I was the first sergeant that was responsible, and those mothers hated me, so I guess they were glad when I left Fort Huachuca, after I we left here, and got my commission at Fort Benning, Georgia. Now, we speak a lot about prejudice, discrimination, but I want to point out one thing. In Officer Candidate School, we had no prejudice problem. We were taught if you want to be a leader, you told a man what to do, he did what you want him to do, you better do it, or you hit him. You can't do that today. There's another man down there. And I was a little bitty guy, but of course I got my staff sergeantship because the first week I was in the Army, I was down in Nogales, Arizona, and some big guy walked by, and Dr. Thompson knows about it, and he said, "Out of my way, Shorty." And I took a chair and I went over his head. And I went to a Mexican jail. The judge sentenced, luckily it was on a Sunday night, but the judge sentenced me, he made me pay for the chair, $1 2 cents for the pay for the chair. But he said I was violent. Because that big guy would have killed me if he'd gotten up. But when he went down, I went down there. So when I got back to the post, they knew that I had material for being a sergeant. So I made staff sergeant right away, and first sergeant, and that's why I was such a young officer, staff officer too. But when the war ended, we were put in boxcars, officers, 50 of us, 50 of the top-ranking 92nd Division soldiers, put in boxcars and sent from Milan for 4 days down to Naples. Now, in that long train, we were in boxcars in the front. In the middle of that train were German soldiers under guard, in coach. And on the end of that train were German officers in Pullman. 4 days, the train zigzagged and zigzagged, but the Southern officers, VMI, made sure that we were trained, we were shown off. We were the victors, but we weren't honorable enough to be considered equal to the enemy. But we did it, we took it. Then we got ready to come back to the United States, and the pregnant wax knocked us out. The pregnant officer wiped us out. We were going to fly back, so we ended up back on a Liberty ship. Then we landed in Naples, and then we were given orders to go home for 30 days, and then report back to Fort McClellan, Alabama. Fort McClellan, Alabama, and regrettably there was a colonel from Indiana that was in charge of the camp there for an American reorientation course. What the hell is that? American reorientation. So you'll see in my article I did take the course. It was a hell of a course. Passed it. But under the situation at the end of World War II, if you'd been in grade over a year as an officer, in grade for over a year, and you had an excellent or superior rating, you were promoted one rank above going on terminal leave. But the War Department issued orders that all colored officers would be lieutenants. Fortunately, there was one division, one regiment, the 366 of Massachusetts, that had colonels and above. And they were treated like dirt by General Almond. And they almost disbanded. But that's the only representation we had of an officer above second lieutenant, a first lieutenant. I was a first lieutenant at that time. I made captain later on. But we did go back. I took my trip back to Indiana, back to Nogales, Arizona, and went up and picked up my children, and I drove all the way to Tijuana. I was looking for it was a hell of a note, to go take an American reorientation course in Alabama. But we took it. But I got there. I was getting the hell out of here. But I stopped in Tijuana, but you couldn't get a house there, so I got a house in Chula Vista, and that's where I raised and educated my children. And after my wife died, I put all 4 of them to college, and they've done a good job. But then one other bad thing. I was there. Went to San Diego for a parade right after about 46. I think Decoration Day, and I was a drill master for the group. That was the American Veterans Committee, the Catholic War veterans, and the Knights of Columbus veterans. But I was a drill officer. And we were parading down Broadway, and an admiral from the Navy came out to stop the parade. He says, "Now what the hell is going on here?" I said, "Who is this boy?" It's a little colored boy. I'm a first lieutenant then. Just leading these white troops, white men. He said, white men. Black boy leading white men in San Diego. That's how prejudiced San Diego was. But my men stood behind me, and we put on a hell of a drill show. And we had everybody around, and that admiral was relieved that day. He was relieved. But we put on a hell of a drill show. So that was why pretty much the end of my battle with the prejudice. But because I'm still in the military, they will never relieve me. And she says, she'll tell you about my fighting. You can tell them about it. Yeah.
All right, he says I should share the story, and this was written up in the Desert Sun. I think it was in Germany, but someplace where he was. They always say the World War II veterans never talk about their experiences. We're hearing about other things that happened, but nothing about what they went through overseas. But anyway, this German officer or something was about to go after him, and so he grabbed his ear, and he bit it off. He won. He's a winner. What? I had the pleasure of interviewing, when I started my show on Time Warner Cable, several of the Tuskegee Airmen, and some of them are up on this mural. And Dr. Robert Higginbotham was one of the guests. And so it's my pleasure to introduce him to you now.
Thank you very much. You forgot.
I forgot.
Okay.
Should we get Rusty in?
No, that's all right. I will acquiesce in that. Rusty Burns speak next, and then I'll follow him.
Okay, all right.
Talking, since I did mention the mural of the Tuskegee Airmen, if you look up in the corner, that very handsome man on the corner, that's Rusty Burns. And here is, Rusty told me he wanted to be last, but he changed his mind. Dr. Higginbotham changed your mind?
No, it really wasn't a coincidence that I chose to speak last. As you can probably appreciate, I know my comrades very well. And if I let all three of them speak ahead of me, there won't be much time left, and I won't have to say much. But for some reason, Dr. Higginbotham decided to change that. Normally, I would talk about the legacy and the legend of Tuskegee Airmen. I've done that here a number of times, a number of years, so I assume most of you have heard that. Today, I'm going to change and I'm going to talk about me. My experiences, where I started. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1925. As you can see, I'm the young one. I'm the kid here. I stayed in New Orleans, and my love of aviation began at about 7 or 8 year old, and it continued. We came to California in 1939, and I went to school in California. I chose to go to David Starr Jordan High School in Watts, which at the time might not have been a wise choice, but it turned out to be a very wise choice. Because in my senior year, we had a school teacher by the name of Mr. Cosgrove, who was a pilot. And Mr. Cosgrove elected to teach a class in aeronautics at Jordan High School my senior year. I was very fortunate to be able to attend that class. Also, Mr. Cosgrove, because I knew nothing about the Tuskegee Airmen. I knew nothing about black pilots. There were no newspapers or anything here to tell me about it. I didn't even know they existed. But Mr. Cosgrove did. And in the latter part of 1942, he announced to the class that the government had changed the requirements from what it originally was, 21 years old, college education, and not married. That's what the folks who came ahead of me had to deal with. Well, they changed it. When conscription came in, they lowered the age to 18, and they accepted high school graduates, right up my alley. So Mr. Cosgrove announced that the government was going to give a test for pilot training, and he instructed those of us who were interested to go. I did, took the test, I passed it. I was 17 at the time, I wasn't old enough, and I hadn't finished high school either. So I went the rest of the year, finished school. On my 18th birthday, I was inducted into the Army Air Corps. Went down to Tuskegee, did all my things, went through. I graduated in December of 1944, getting close to the end of the war. Well, I graduated in December, went into fighter transition, which is about 3 months. By that time, it's obvious the war in Europe is going to come to an end. So the government decided not to send any more replacement pilots over to Europe. Instead, they would transfer us to another base, give us another airplane, start teaching us how to speak Japanese, and we were going to go to the Pacific sometime in September. Well, as you all know, the war ended in August 1945. So fortunately or unfortunately, I will never know which for sure, I did not get overseas. but I still had my love of aviation. I got out of the service in 1946 in Los Angeles, California. Went to work for the post office, which was a very boring job. No airplanes. Couldn't get a job with the airlines. They wouldn't even talk to us. I went to all the airlines trying to get a job. I had more hours and requirements and more qualifications than the others who were being hired. But we could not get a job with the airlines. So after about 8 years, I ran into an old buddy who had an airplane. And I decided, he talked me into going up. I really wasn't all that enthused because it was this little Piper Cub you see over here, the yellow thing in the other, little bitty tiny engine, you know, 2 seats about this wide. So after flying that thing right there, I wasn't really interested in flying the little Cub. But he talked me into going up, and I did. And this little airplane just made a fool out of me for about 30 minutes. I couldn't keep the wings level. I couldn't keep the nose straight. I couldn't hold altitude. It was just really embarrassing. It was so embarrassing, I decided that day I better learn how to fly again. So that was the beginning of my career. He and I opened the flying business on the Compton Airport about 1953. I was there for about 20 years. I had a really, really awesome career in aviation. I started out just teaching, went to rebuilding, did sales and service, and along about 1960, I was called to do some stunt work for a movie. And that was another career. I did air shows, aerobatic air shows with some of the greats, Pappy Boyington, Bob Hoover, some of the greats of our time. For about 10 years, I did air shows and movie and stunt work, which was very gratifying to do that. However, flying business kind of went down when the GI Bill started to fade out and business wasn't all that good. So I decided I got 4 kids coming up getting ready to go to college. I better do some serious work somewhere. So I went to work for North American. Because I was a Tuskegee Airman, because of my background as a Tuskegee Airman, doors opened for me unbelievable. I went up North American and I just went to the top. I retired. In 1988, I was manager of travel service, corporate manager of travel service for all Rockwell International. So the Tuskegee Airmen gave me a career in aviation, gave me a career in the private sector, and I flew. I had my own airplane from the time I had the service until I moved, just before I moved out here, as a matter of fact. I thought maybe I'd push my luck. Got a little bit of arthritis. I couldn't bend down and get underneath the panel anymore. Couldn't crawl under the wing and take protection plates loose. All my career, I'd always worked on my own airplanes. I never let anybody else work on my airplane. If I was going to fly, I was going to know that it was in good shape. Anyway, I reached this point in 2001, June the 29th, 2001, and I decided it was time to retire. And I sold my beloved Cessna 310 and thought I'd done the right thing until I moved out to Palm Desert. All of my friends are 200, 300 miles away from here now. I would love to have had that airplane to fly out of the Bermuda Dunes at a time like now. Having said that, my time's up. I thank you very much. I thank you all for coming out. We appreciate your adulation.
And now we'll meet Dr. Higginbotham. And of course, both Higginbothams were in the Tuskegee Airmen.
Pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to have such a nice and large audience. The reason I chose to usurp my colleague to be the last speaker, I happen to know all 3 of these gentlemen, and they're long-winded. And they followed right down the line, the script of long-winded. I hope I do not take as much time as they did, because I think Gloria wants to leave for the audience to ask questions, any questions that they want to ask the 4 gentlemen up here about what you want to know about the Tuskegee Airmen and the 92nd Buffalo Squad. I'm the youngest on the totem pole of these gentlemen. I'm the youngest on the totem pole of the gentlemen on the platform today. And as again, I've learned my lesson to let them get all of the glory and the accolades that go along with it. My brother, I followed in his footsteps since I've been knee-high to a duck. And it was always my desire to try and be a pilot. And I followed him right through that role. At the time he was in the service and down at Tuskegee, I was a 16-year-old person in high school in the same little town, Swickley, Pennsylvania. And Swickley, Pennsylvania consisted of approximately 6,000 people with approximately 600 blacks. My uncle was a janitor in the elementary school. I was a very mischievous young fellow. I was in and out of the principal's office, and whenever the principal saw me coming, he said, Bob, he just waved me to the basement. And when my uncle saw me come into the basement, he said, you know what to do. And I would take my pants down, and he took a paddle. I would go back to class. My father and mother never knew I was such a tyrant or a mischievous young fellow because my uncle never told on me. I continued to follow my brother to become a Tuskegee Airman. It was my desire. However, I never thought about having a problem in that I knew that I could follow in his footsteps by getting the right information to join. So in my senior year at high school, I was walking down the hall, and it had never been advertised in my high school about the aviation cadet exam being given. So I looked upon the door where the room was and said, aviation cadet exam now being given. So I walked into the room. There were about 50 students, and I'm the only black because the rest of the blacks did not know the examination was being given. I took the examination, passed it, and when you passed the examination, they had a pile over here. The ones that passed, the ones that did not pass, they were placed there and said they could leave. So when all of the ones that had passed examination were in the room, they showed us we had two representatives, one from the Navy, one from the United States Air Corps. At that time, it was the Air Corps and not the Air Force. The importance of a Buffalo soldier is getting called right now. And they're running back. They're running back. We'll get this thing all over. However, when I passed the examination, I looked over at the lieutenant. It was in the United States Army Air Corps. He had on the pink pants and the olive drab coat and some silver wings like my brother and Rusty have. I looked at the Navy guy on. He had his beautiful white, sparkling white uniform with his gold wings on. I looked back at the Air Force guy and I looked back. I said, I'm going over here with the Navy. So I stood in line for 10 or 15 minutes till I got up to the place where they were taking our applications and accepting you into the reserves and to be called active duty when you finished high school. I was in high school. So when I got up to the Navy lieutenant, he looked at me and the guy looked at my hair and he said, well, I'm sorry, no blacks in this line. You have to go over and get in the United States Army Air Corps. And naturally, I was taken aback. I went over and signed up for the United States Air Force. And I'm going to try to be short-winded and not follow my fellow Tuskegee Airmen and cut this a little short. When I finished, I was called to go at that time at 18 years of age. I graduated July 12th. July the 4th, I was on a train going to Keesler Field, Mississippi. My parents are from Virginia, but I never had much dealing with the Deep South. We rode the train from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati. At Cincinnati, we had to change trains, and they had two coaches for blacks, and the other coaches, which were about 7, 8, 10 more, were all whites. And we didn't argue too much about that, so we got on the train, traveled all night, and all of a sudden the train came to a halt in the middle of a large field. And we looked out of the windows, it was just dusk, daybreak, and a contingent of white soldiers were getting on the train. So the conductor came along and he said, all you people in the second coach, move up to the first coach. And for the elder people in this audience, At that time, they were steam engines powered by coal, bituminous coal, that put out heavy black smoke, white smoke, all kinds of smoke, and dust and dirt, whatever you want to call it. So we're 15 of us, and we looked up to the first coach where the blacks were sitting, and everybody sitting on the floor, sitting on boxes, standing up, and we told the conductor, we're not moving. And the conductor said, oh yes, you'll move. And we said, we're not moving. We can't move up here and stand up all the way to Biloxi, Mississippi. So he said, you'll move. He went out and he came back with an MP, white MP, who was about 6'6", 250 pounds, with a billy club that long and a 45 on his side. And he said, move. And I said, yes, sir. I got to move. Now, I had to fight that down all my life. I told the story naturally more time than I can think of. And I told it to my 2 sons. And they were adamant. I wouldn't have moved. I wouldn't have moved. No, I'd have sat there. I would not have moved. I said, yeah, you wouldn't have a daddy. That was my story. After going to Keesler Field in Mississippi, as they've said before, we took examinations and had to, they were called Stanine scores. You have to have a certain score to, which rated you as pilot, bombardier, and navigator. And for 2 or 3 days, we took those examinations and then took our basic training. And a lot of us were called to Tuskegee Army Airfield, and more of the fellows did not make it to Tuskegee. Well, at Tuskegee, it took about 2 classes for me to start my pilot training, and I was in the class 3rd from the last that finished at Tuskegee, Alabama. I served as the honor guard in the primary where was given at Tuskegee Institute, folding the flag. So I got a lot of experience in how to fold that flag while at Tuskegee. After my career in the service, I was discharged. Fort George Meade, went to back home to Pittsburgh, went to college as a civil engineer for approximately 3 years, then changed my major to medicine and transferred to the University of Pittsburgh and received my Bachelor of Science degree in 1951. And lo and behold, I was recalled into the service. At this time, I'd finished ROTC, and I reported to the officer at the Air Force office, and I told him I've served my time. And he said, you didn't read the fine print. I said, what do you mean? He said, here, I'll show you. He gave me the papers. I had served 23 months. And the paper said, you have to have 24 months. So I was recalled for another 2 years. I'd been promoted to first lieutenant. I was recalled and went to Langley Air Force Base, where I spent 2 years there with the Air Force. And the last thing that I remember, and I will close my remarks shortly, a colonel in the Air Force, he wanted to make general, he was a full colonel, and he called not only myself, but seven other young second and first lieutenants into his office, and he tried to sign us up for the regular Air Force, and all seven of us refused me. So when he had me into the office, he said, Lieutenant, why do you think you don't want to join the regular Air Force? And I told him I was going to medical school. So he said, well, I'm sending you overseas. And I said, no, Colonel, you can't send me overseas. He said, what do you mean I can't send you overseas? So he called in his adjutant and said, his name was Lieutenant Smith. I remember it like it was yesterday. Lieutenant Smith, can this soldier deny or refuse to go overseas? He said, I think he's right, Colonel, because the rules and regulations state that you must have a year left in service to send a person overseas. I wish they would think about that now. Maybe our budget wouldn't be so high, because they don't want to send someone overseas and he stays over there 6, 8, 9 months, and then they have to discharge him, pay his way back, and get somebody else. So with those remarks, I will close saying that after I finished medical school, I did general practice for 6 years, and then I went back into training at the age of 38 years and spent 5 more years studying orthopedic surgery. 43 years of age, I finished my training. And I practiced up until about 1971 and retired. However, I still work a little bit, 1 day a week, and I love the job I'm doing. And I love the rest of my fellow Tuskegee Airmen, and I'll close with these remarks because we'd like to take questions from the audience. Thank you.
Because we're going to have a fly-in with the P-51, which of course, that was the escort plane. They escorted all the bombers, and you know that none of the bombers were shot down with the Tuskegee Airmen as their escorts. But so we're going to take maybe only 2 questions. This is what? The Playboy. Are you selling these?
90-year-old widower.
Yeah.
Got 2 cards with Playboy Club.
Oh. He's a rogue. So I refer these. If we could have maybe 2 or 3 questions, and we'll, there's a microphone back there, and then I'll take this out and we'll go here. So, where's the question?
Anybody have a question?
Okay.
I got one gentleman back here.
Sir, I went to David Starr Jordan High School on 103rd Street in South Los Angeles, your high school. Also, I lived in Compton for a while by the Compton Airport. And were you there when they had the experimental twin-engine jet that was going through?
No, I don't really. The Air Commander?
Yes.
A couple of young men bought a wrecked Aero Commander and rebuilt it right there. No, I don't, that was about 1978 or 79. I left about 1973.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just a coincidence because.
Yeah, but I know of the airplane. That's a history. If I had another 20 minutes, I'll tell you that story.
After, there's a gentleman right down here in the second row that has a question. Right here in the second row. Thank you.
I'm from Detroit, and the mayor of Detroit at one time, he's dead now, it's Coleman Young. Did any of you guys know Coleman Young? He's a great mayor.
We did our convention there.
Oh,
Coleman Young, at the time we were locked up and held for court martial for
Yeah.
refusing the mayor or speaking.
He was part of
Coleman Young at that time had been an organizer for the automobile union, so he was quite a spokesman.
Yes.
And he was one of our leading spokesmen.
yeah.
So he was honored by our convention in Detroit, and he died shortly
Yeah.
after that.
Okay.
But I know him quite well.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for just one more. And like I mentioned, if you folks stick around after the flight, these gentlemen will be available as well. You can meet them in person.
Hello, my name is Rose, and I want to say that I am from Sewickley, Pennsylvania, and I'm really proud of both of you. I was born on Dixon Road, I'm sure you're familiar, and I understand, I was told that there were like 8 Tuskegee Airmen that came out of Sewickley. Is that true?
That's true.
And now look at the ratio, 600 black and 8 from a little town like Sewickley, Pennsylvania.
That is a great observation. We had the highest ratio than any place in the country.
I'd like to correct the gentleman. Los Angeles County, the city of Los Angeles had 20. So that's a little bit more than 8.
You had many, many more blacks there. We only had a couple hundred. The ratio, my friend, is percentage. Percentage.
I'm going to take one more question back here, gentlemen, if you don't mind.
Hello, I just ran in here from Los Angeles. I'm so sorry I missed most of your presentation. Which one is the Buffalo Soldier? Oh, okay. Are you going to have a program anytime in the future in Los Angeles?
No, not Los Angeles unless I'm called, but I will be speaking quite frequently. In fact, this young lady has a piece of document I just handed her. Would you tell them about this? Now, this, I'm in World War II, from February 41 to 45.
Well, I can read it, but maybe you should explain it. All right, apparently the discharge is not a discharge, it says Certificate of Recognition, George B. Edwards, in recognition of your service during the period of the Cold War, 2nd September 1945, 26 December 1991, in promoting peace and stability for this nation. The people of this nation are forever grateful. And it's signed by the Secretary of Defense. Now, did you want to say something about that briefly?
No, it just shows you that if the government gets you, it sure helps. I'm still on the call.
Thank you. He also has here, which is very interesting, the Purple Heart Medal. And while they're giving Purple Hearts, they're not giving this kind of medal anymore because World War I and World War II were declared by Congress and are constitutional. The other wars are, what is it you call it? It's not statutory wars, and so therefore they don't give this kind of medal. So maybe after the fly-in, you can hang on to this, and if people want to come over and see it, it's really quite beautiful.
It's a very rare medallion. Only the World War I and World War II veterans, Purple Heart veterans, because it was a situation where President Wilson and President Roosevelt did go to Congress to get a declaration of war. Since then, it's all statutory, and therefore the president can call under our so-called statutory wars, the National Guard and so forth. But under the Constitution, it has to be a declaration of war. And we